In the autumn of 1562, Elizabeth I fell gravely ill with smallpox here at Hampton Court. She was only 29 years old and had no heir to succeed her. Panic swept through the court. Her council convened an urgent meeting to discuss the line of succession. But after several tense days, against all expectations, Elizabeth recovered. Yet the question of who would inherit the throne never truly went away, and for the next 40 years, Elizabeth would face constant pressure either to marry or to designate an heir. Fast forward to March 1603. Elizabeth, now 69, lay dying at Richmond Palace. According to the traditional narrative, with her final breaths, she named her heir as James VI of Scotland, declaring, "I will have none but him." She passed away, and the throne supposedly transferred peacefully to the Stuarts, or at least that's what we've been led to believe. Much of what we know about Elizabeth I's death and James I's succession comes from William Camden's Annals, the earliest biography of Elizabeth, which claims she named James on her deathbed. However, dramatic new evidence uncovered 2 years ago reveals that Camden's account was fictionalized and later rewritten to suggest a predetermined succession. In reality, Elizabeth died without naming an heir. James had, in effect, inserted himself into the story and the line of succession. But James was not an obvious choice. He was Scottish, and England and Scotland had been bitter rivals for centuries. Henry VIII had explicitly barred the Scots from inheriting the English throne. James was technically an illegal successor and was also the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's fiercest rival. So if not James, who else could have been next in line? My new book explores that very question. We are fortunate that civil war did not erupt upon Elizabeth's death, which had been a real concern for her counselors, who would have spent hours here at Hampton Court's council chamber, worrying about the various claimants. In 1600, government official Thomas Wilson wrote, "This crown is not likely to fall to the ground for want of heads that claim to wear it." While he admitted it was straitly prohibited to discuss the succession, he noted at least 12 individuals who, in his words, gaped for Elizabeth's death. So who were the main contenders? One of the foremost rivals was Mary Stuart, or Mary, Queen of Scots. She had the strongest blood claim to the English throne, being a descendant of Henry VIII's eldest sister, Margaret, and her claim was further strengthened by her brief tenure as Queen of France. However, she faced significant obstacles. Henry VIII had barred his Scottish relatives from inheriting the English throne, and a statute of 1351 prohibited so-called aliens, those not born in England, from ascending to the throne. Despite these barriers, Mary campaigned relentlessly for Elizabeth's crown, but her ambition ultimately led to her downfall, with Elizabeth ordering her execution in 1587. I would rate Mary's claim at 60%. Upon Mary's death, her claim passed to her son, James VI of Scotland. James had the advantage of experience, having ruled Scotland for decades, and he had cultivated influential relationships with Elizabeth's government. He maintained a long-standing correspondence with Elizabeth herself, who seemed to guide him on how to be a good future king. Yet James faced challenges. His mother's treachery tainted him, and the same legal bars applied to his claim. Clearly, he felt insecure enough to later have Camden rewrite history in his favor. With strong English allies and Elizabeth's implicit support, however, James's odds were still solid. I would give him a 70% chance. Who did James see as his greatest threat? Lady Catherine Grey was an obvious contender. She was a descendant of Henry VII's younger sister, Mary, and Henry VIII had decreed that Mary's descendants held a strong claim to the throne, next in line after his own children if they died without heirs. Catherine further strengthened her position by secretly marrying someone outside the arranged line. Catherine Grey also had a claim to Elizabeth's throne. She secretly married Edward Seymour, the nephew of the late Queen Jane Seymour and her cousin. This union made them a powerful couple, but because they married without Elizabeth's consent, she was furious. the Queen declared the marriage illegitimate, which meant the children of the union were also considered illegitimate. Yet it is telling that Catherine was often depicted with her eldest son, Edward, because legally he should have been next in line when Elizabeth died. Despite Elizabeth's disapproval, Catherine and her sons remained serious contenders for the throne for years. I would give Catherine a solid rating for her claim.
Like James, Arbella Stewart was descended from Henry VIII's elder sister, Margaret. In fact, she arguably had an advantage over James because she was born on English soil. Arbella also had two powerful grandmothers in her corner, Lady Margaret Douglas, a claimant herself, and the formidable Bess of Hardwicke. These women positioned her as a serious contender for Elizabeth's throne. Arbella was raised in a restrictive environment away from court to prepare her for queenship, but this contributed to her unstable temperament. Her position was further strengthened when Catherine Grey's marriage was declared illegitimate, along with her sons. However, Arbella's own haughty and arrogant nature alienated Elizabeth, who considered her unfit to rule. Arbella later made a secret marriage to William Seymour, a descendant of Catherine Grey, and, as a result, spent the rest of her life imprisoned in the Tower. While Elizabeth may not have approved of her, Arbella's claim was legitimate, so I'd rate her at 55%. Henry Hastings, the third Earl of Huntingdon, was different from the others because he had no Tudor blood. He was a Plantagenet descendant, the great-grandson of Lady Margaret Pole, and his grandfather, Henry, Lord Montague, had been a close favorite of Henry VIII. Being male gave him an additional advantage in the eyes of the time. Henry had strong backing, but he never sought the throne and remained loyal to Elizabeth. Nevertheless, she never fully trusted him, promoting him to office only later in life. Henry eventually died childless, and his lack of ambition means I would give him a 40% rating. Lady Margaret Stanley also had a claim. She, like the Grey sisters, descended from Henry VIII's younger sister Mary through her mother Eleanor Brandon. In theory, her line was superior, but she argued that the treason of Lady Jane Grey invalidated other claimants. Margaret had two sons, including Ferdinando, seen here. However, her Catholic faith made her unacceptable to the Protestant court, and her claim was weaker than the Greys, so I would rate her at 30%. The final significant claimant was the Infanta Isabella of Spain, daughter of Philip II and Elizabeth of Valois. When Philip's military attempts to seize the English throne failed, he promoted Isabella's claim. In a twist, Isabella's claim could be considered stronger than the Tudors, as through her mother she descended from John of Gaunt, son of Edward III, while the Tudors were from an illegitimate line. Nevertheless, the English people would have been unlikely to accept a Spanish princess as queen, so I would rate her claim at 25%. In the end, James VI inherited Elizabeth's throne, uniting England and Scotland, but it was far from inevitable. The notion of a smooth transition from Tudor to Stuart was largely constructed. James secured his crown and legitimacy through political alliances and rewriting history. Had circumstances shifted through a different marriage or ally, the course of British history could have been completely altered. The end of the Tudors proved difficult for Parliament and England alike. James, as King of England, ignored Elizabeth's advice on ruling effectively, quickly falling out with Parliament. He isolated himself with a few favorites, pursued radical Protestant policies, alienated Catholics, and sparked rebellions. His son, Charles I, inherited this approach, taking the divine right of kings to extremes. This ultimately led to conflict with Parliament, a bitter civil war, and the execution of the king, destroying the monarchy within a single generation.